Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the I2 podcast. So excited for another episode. You know, our passion is really to see the influence that God has given you lead to impact wherever God has called you, no matter where that is, no matter what you're doing. I'm excited about our conversation today. I've got a friend of mine who honestly haven't got to spend tons of time with, but definitely there's people you meet and you just feel a connection. You feel the power and presence of God over their lives. And that's my friend right here, Reward. What's up, brother? How you doing?
JD, brother, thank you so much, man, for having me. The connection was real, man. It was kingdom, and I'm excited, man, to be on this crucial platform.
It's so cool. We were talking a little earlier before we got started, and I remember we were on this ranch together. We met, and I remember you were going around to every person. I'll never forget. It's like, man, you look me dead in the eyes, and you're like, man, what's your passion? What is God doing in your life? What's he saying? And then you listened so intently, like you really wanted to know.
Wow.
And I just remember thinking, this dude is like interested in people and values people really well.
Man.
So honestly, bro, like I'll never forget that experience.
No, thank you so much. And honestly, bro, I think that was the connection there, because it's almost like you had been set up your whole life to talk about what God called you to do, man, right? And passion always attracts, right?
Yeah.
You know, in the Bible, when Mary and Elizabeth come together, then the babies leapt in their wombs. And I feel like that's essentially what happened. Bro, you just went into the incredible things that you guys are doing, man, and your love for God and people was so evident. I couldn't not listen intently, man, because your passion for God and people was that intense.
No.
And your intentionality. And it wasn't even just that, man. For me, what really got me the most about you was the fact that there was also a lot of strategy around the passion, right? There was a lot of like framework. It was perfectly built. You were able to tell me what you guys were doing, but then as well, like cast a vision for where you guys were going to go. It was such a compelling conversation. I remember leaving and going, watch this space. This is kingdom space right here. So it was a good conversation.
I don't remember anything I shared, but all I remember is, I don't know if this guy's giving everybody this much attention, but man, this brother cares for real.
No, there was definitely a kindred knitting.
Man. And it's been cool, obviously, through social media and stuff, being able to follow you, your work with World Vision, your work and being a part of so many relevant conversations that are happening in our world today. Just for those who don't know you, just like a couple minutes, tell us your story and how you got into the role that you're in today. Yeah.
No, so my story comes from a long time ago, right? In a land far, far away. In case you guys have noticed from the accent. But I actually originate from Zimbabwe, Bulawayo, right? That's Africa. And ever since, it's like I remember something happened my school back then that changed the entire zeitgeist of my school. And I remember thinking, man, media is powerful. We were exposed to Western media and it changed the way everyone did everything within a week in my African high school. And I remember going, man, if media is this powerful,
wow.
If you can control the medium, right, you can control the message. And I know that in the future, there is going to be space for this. So I was like, man, I want to go to the US and study media. So that when I come back then the airwaves were locked with all the political stuff that was happening. If I come back, and when I come back, I can then have, right, transformational content, right, beamed to my people in Zimbabwe. And it wasn't necessarily faith-based. I had started watching TED Talks, and they radically changed my thought process, gave me the exposure, right, that takes you out of context and makes you a better person. That I was like, my entire generation, right, in an African or in a third world context needs to hear this. So came to the US pursuing media, but back then it was kind of cool because of all the political sanctions, no one was coming out of the country except if you were going on the backbone of a credible ministry organization. So I remember going, just the way the plan shaped out was like, well, let me go to Christ for the Nations, the Bible school, because they were giving away scholarships, and they were in great standing with the embassy was in great standing with our government. And when I get there, right, do a year, literally lock down a lot of my theological process, and then go ahead and learn as much as I can from Hollywood, and then come back. And I remember it was at Christ for the Nations that I felt like the Lord shifted my major, and I began to have a passion for the local church. The the local church is the most powerful entity that God has ever created, right?
Wow.
But in a Western context, and you know this, JD, because you guys are doing something similar. The Western church will have a church of about 60 people, but the societal impact is incredible, right?
Wow.
They've built schools, they feed people in the inner city, which was something which is rare within the African context. So the Lord shifted my major, and He's like, hey, I want you to study my body, my bride, the local church.
Wow.
And since then, I have been on a grind, man, to who's doing it right, what are the systems and the strategies and the best practices. And so I became a student of the local church. And it was through that I met Michael Chitwood, the executive director of church and ministry partnerships at World Vision. And he just kind of saw what I was doing naturally, just going around with pastors, learning and honoring them. He's like, bro, I actually came from a meeting where we're putting together a team of people who do exactly what you do. So that's how I ended up being at World Vision, where I'm at right now. Married to an incredible Enneagram 7 wife.
Party all day.
Yo, it's wild energy. We're double 7, so.
No, I didn't even know that was possible. You're double 7, man.
Hey, Josh, what's your Enneagram, brother?
That's crazy. So I'm an Enneagram 1.
Oh, come on, take over the world. Let's go.
I prefer the word reformer over perfection.
I love that.
My wife is an Enneagram 9, though.
Oh,
and so I mean,
that's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, she's pretty amazing. So I tell people together we're a perfect 10. You know what I'm saying?
I see you. Okay. Lines for days.
It's rare, you get that 10 there. But honestly, I did not know you could have 2 7s together, or 2 people the same number.
Yeah,
I can't imagine how much fun you guys have in that house.
Oh, dude, I'm telling you, man, it's like it's high energy. It's fun until we both cry.
Random just trips. Hey, let's go to Cali today. Come on.
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is.
You know what? Load up. We're going to Nebraska. Like,
let's go. I'm telling you, man.
I love that. Hey, one thing you said, which I just want to ask about.
Yeah.
The context you came from in Africa,
you
started to see the power of the local church.
Yeah.
But it was maybe different from what you experienced when you were in Africa. And correct me if I'm wrong in saying that. What was the local church in Africa like?
Yeah.
And like how did that start to shift your paradigm?
Dude, that's a great question. So the greatest descriptor, right, about the African church also comes in the form of an indictment, which is the African church has a lot of zeal without knowledge, right? Like a runaway horse. It's just like, and you see it, man, we are zealous around spiritual things because it is just a highly spiritual atmosphere, right? We're zealous about that. And our sociology, our social structures mandate gathering, right? In which if you are Christian, then the church becomes the epicenter of social gathering. So that's why the disparity was so apparent, because I'm like, here's this social group called the African church where we've been meeting in the same building or under the same tree for about 10 years. But come the middle of the week, right, nobody knows we're even there because around the society, right, there is a very little impact. So spiritually, when it comes to the disciplines and prayer and everything, the African church is there. But to have solid, replicable models that affect the society around you, which when you read from the book of Acts all the way through the history of the ecclesia, you see that it is unto societal transformation. Right. And so it was such a missing crucial aspect of it. And so that's why even in my journey or my walkabout, this journey of discovery was, if I can merge, the systemic structure of the Western church,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, with the zeal and the knowledge and the discipline of the African church, I believe that's an explosive church right there.
Wow.
That is a lot closer to the model and the image, right? And the icon that God had when He spoke about His bride.
Yeah.
Yeah, those
that's, for me, that's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Because we work in the inner city context.
Yep.
And one of the things that we've learned over the years in our city alone, there's been over 800 murders in the last, 30 years. And so we actually put together what we call a murder map. And we, with pins, mapped out all the murders in our city.
Yeah.
We also put together a church map.
Come on.
And you know what the tragedy is? The murder map and the church map look almost identical.
Oh, dude.
And I've actually heard it's a national statistic that where there's the most crime, violence, and murders, there's actually the most churches.
Wow. Dude, that's crazy.
And so like for us in the inner city, there's churches all over the community. Yeah. But they're consistent with what you just shared. Yeah. They're churches that really don't understand the community development side. Yeah. They're kind of just operating within the context of their four walls. Yeah. And it can be for a variety of reasons. Honestly, some of it, even some of the, justice or injustice that has happened for generations. Yeah. But it's the typical white suburban church has a paradigm for missions that the typical Black inner city church doesn't have. And part of it, one's in survival. Yeah. And the other has the capacity and resources to do more, to think more. And so it's interesting because you take it all the way back to Africa. Yeah. Yeah. And I just wonder, like, what's the history behind it? Yeah. And if that was even part of what got transferred to the African-American church in the Western culture, because they sound very similar and consistent in terms of their model.
Dude, I think you bring up such an interesting point, man. And I would even take it back to, the study of our being as humans, right? That expression or generosity always comes after impression, right? What has happened on the inside of you. It's like we always give out of our excess. As humans, we are wired that way specifically. Yep. So I think what you're saying also does point to the disparity between the ecology or even the wealth of the two dynamics, right? I like what you said. The African American church, or the Black church specifically within the American context, is still in a lot of ways in survival mode, right? Because for them, it's like church is a legacy that's passed from generation to generation with roots, right, in slavery. Whereas a lot of and you know this because you've done some stuff with ARC and everything, a lot of the white church, if it's not orthodox, right, if it's not old school, then when people were called to start a church, they went about it from almost like an entrepreneurial perspective, right? They raised support, they raised awareness. They were they started the church like they would start a business, right? Which means that within the very bylaws of that church as a newer venture, was authored in the things which are relevant to our sociology. And our sociology right now mandates that causes and people giving and all this. So I think you're right. It speaks to very, very interesting roots, man. It speaks to very interesting roots. And even interestingly enough, too, is when you look at African American church, right? Going back to the sociology of Black people and W.E.B. Du Bois in Souls of Black Folk, he has a very interesting take on this, because what he talks about is if Black church has been generational and there's a legacy aspect of it, that unfortunately also comes with a level of exclusivity. You see what I'm saying? Right. If my great-great-grandfather started this church, then the families that he started with, there's some legacy, there's things that I carried on. So if you walk in, no matter how much we think we are, but we're not fundamentally seeker friendly,
Right.
because we've clicked and we don't even know that we've clicked.
Right.
So I think it's very interesting dynamics that you bring.
Do you think, and this kind of gets into some of the things that I wanted to talk about with race and justice or injustice, it even goes back to when you think of what the Black church was birthed out of. And you think of slavery, and you think of, man, they had to come together in a survival mode. And really use their faith to spur each other on to survive the circumstances, the environments that they were in. And it was that type of faith, that type of culture, and that type of environment that's been reproduced for generations. And so as a result, the context that the churches are thought about, that are developed, that are created, are actually a result that goes back to the early days of the church, birthed in slavery, and the lack of resources to think entrepreneurial and to develop. I mean, you just look at some of the economics, and the average white family, mean household, average Black family. I look at our city churches. We've got, the largest Black church has raised like a little over $1 million in the last 16 years. We've got churches in the suburban context that have raised 20 million, 22 million, 60
and there aren't
in
even
the last 3 years.
Right? Exactly. And you'd be surprised that it's not even mega churches. It's like, these are like middle-sized, just very active. But if you look at this though, here's what's crazy. In the perfect, well, it's almost an oxymoron to say in the perfect context, because the church was born out of, suffering and, and all those things. But even when you look at it, when the church was getting its identity, Peter and them were always talking about how Stephen got involved in the mix was because they were already distributing food, to all those things. And then when he says, he's like, hey, always give to the poor. Those are the two things. It's like, you don't need circumcision as long as you're giving to the poor and everything. And Paul at length in a lot of his letters speaks about it. So at its inception, even in persecution, the church itself has always been expressive, right? And so, and somehow fundamentally, and I think maybe they have this space to go there cognitively and to really speak about the philosophy. I feel like the white church has gotten that at a basic level, because they've actually had to sit down and go, how do we make our church effective? Whereas if it's something that you are receiving, I have a good friend of mine, I don't know if you've heard about him, Will Ford. And Will, he inherited this kettle that is from slavery, that his great grandparents and ancestors, they belonged to this white man who would not let them pray. So they would sneak into the barn to pray in the night, and then they would take this cattle and they'd prop it up on these stones, and then they'd pray into the cattle to muffle the sound, right? And then it gets passed down to him, and now he travels around speaking. So even that legacy in itself, what he generationally has, whereas, there are some churches, Orthodox, and I'm not even talking about the newer ones, which inherit a ridiculous amount of wealth. Where then they can afford to do this and everything. The disparity is crazy, man.
And I think of just the leadership side of things. I mean, even for me coming up, and definitely the generation before, you're looking for leaders to look up to. And there was not a lot of Black prevalent leaders to look up to that were on the main stage leadership conference circuits.
That's right.
And you just look at the development of the Black community versus the white community, and look at the businesses. And I think the churches have developed at the rate of their race. I mean, like
the churches have developed at the rate of their race. Truer words cannot be spoken. That is profound and true, man.
Because it's not just in the church. It's the same. The church is reflecting what's happening in our culture.
Exactly.
The hope would be that the church would lead the way. But the reality is the church has been so far behind.
No. And if you think about it, man, just our churches and this is divine. There's divine design behind this. Our churches are supposed to mirror our sociology, right?
Yeah.
If I'm forgetting who said this, but if your church is not a direct representation of the society or the community around you, then it's not really doing a good job. But then the problem around that is then that is then subject to a lot of the unjust legislation that made redlining and zoning and everything.
Yes.
So then it's like, okay, the church is always supposed to do this, but how do you build that on a flawed foundation?
Yes.
How do you foster diversity when my church is right here and all the other people I want to reach are out there and everything? Yep. So then the question becomes, for people like you that God has called to be thought leaders in the space, is, do we uproot churches and plant them in central spaces? Or do we then, wherever we are, support? Like, what does it look like when God is calling you to a specific region? Right. Is it to make it in the image of the kingdom? Or is it to serve the people and within that sociology and sustain that inclusive, or rather exclusive, ecology? So it's,
what do you say when you're in those conversations with pastors and leaders and that conversation comes up?
So my fundamental assumption when I talk to pastors is that you were called, right, to a specific people. And the strategic aspect of being called to a specific group of people, pastors, that you're called to a specific locale, right? And so if God calls you to Frisco, for example, it's a very highly affluent, predominantly white neighborhood, then my hope is that God has called you there to pastor Friscoans, right? And so in the fine line of your contract with the God who calls you, I believe it's not a copy and paste clause, right, but that is where you should ask the Lord and say, Lord, is our push diversity, or is our push, right? And that's where we make the difference, because diversity is amicable, but some people, like how even the church started, may be called to reach a specific bunch of Jews. That's why I think in the racial conversation, whenever we talk about race and diversity, yes, there's emphasis on those, but our call is primarily to kingdom, right? And kingdom has different manifestations and different expressions. As long as people are not infringing on justice, right, and propagating unjust laws, then the dynamics of where the church is planted and how the pastor does church are up to the pastor and the God who called him. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah. So for me, it's that I do believe there are some churches that God plants in the middle of a metroplex and says, I want you to build the most diverse, right, group of people ever. If that's your modus operandi from the master, then that's what I'm talking about. There are some churches like Upper Room where I go, which are called to be the nexus of generations, which is millennials and Gen Z and the older generation. And along with that, right, comes diversity and causes and everything, because that's what the people are passionate about. But I also believe there are some churches where pastors called into suburban or inner city, and is just called to serve those people who have been marginalized without having to grow. So I think, I don't think it's a copy and paste. I think it's per calling by pastor.
I've been telling some pastors too, to your point, you know, based on where you are, because I'll hear some pastors say, well, we don't have diversity in this part of our city or in our community. And I'll say, well, if you go to the gym right down the street, there's a level of diversity that's there, that's represented, or at the mall.
I love that.
May or may not be represented in your church.
Exactly.
So I do, for me, it's like, man, I don't ever want that to be a cop-out, but I do think we're called to different contexts.
Precisely.
And I also think, just like the story, you know, the religious leader asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? Love your neighbor as you love yourself. And to love your neighbor is to love people who are not like you.
Exactly.
And Jesus tells a story of the Good Samaritan. And I love the story because he goes from being the despised Samaritan to the Good Samaritan.
Exactly.
And we get this picture that even though he originally was the despised Samaritan, the action that he took caused him to be known for something different.
Exactly.
And I think for churches and Christians, man, we got to be known for seeking justice. We've got to be known for people who go after diversity. And I know you feel the same way. I mean, when it comes to the work of World Vision, every church has a mandate and a calling to fight for justice.
Come on.
Talk about that when you go to churches and like, talk about that message.
Absolutely, man. And you frame it so well. In case you guys are watching, this is why I was mesmerized in the conversation, because you really do have a mind and an intellect that God has gifted you with to be a thought leader in this space, to think alternative thoughts, and then just let God's anointing ride on that.
Come on.
I believe, first of all, let me start with the biggest handicap that we have, right, within the American society. The biggest handicap we have is in our sociology, in the fact that America is a primarily, actually, let me start here, right? Socially, our socio-political is America is, it's not a democracy. America is a democratic republic, right? So it's a republic. What is a republic? Yeah. It means you have one person who speaks and governs on behalf of the interests of the people. Now, they are elected democratically. Right. So we vote for who that person, they campaign, and then they're like, hey, I'm going to represent you. So for a year, we get to watch them. And then after a while, we're like, okay, you go and represent us. If it was a democracy, then we would vote on every issue, right? That's a true democracy. But now a republic means, okay, you have absolute power once we elect you. And that's why America set up the two-party system, right, for checks and balances so that that person does not have absolute power.
Right.
But in the end, it is still like a republic, which means we democratically elect someone and then we hold them accountable through checks and balances. Now, look at how everything about our sociology mirrors our sociopolitics, right? Politics. Look at church, for example.
Wow.
90% of the churches that you go to, right, there is a pastor who is elected by a board and the people and the members, right? And they put them up there, and that pastor exists to serve and to minister to those people. And and the people get to vote on a lot of issues. Some people it's through emails, right? Karen, some people it's like whatever, but they have a say in how they are governed. You see what I'm saying? And if a pastor starts doing crazy things like pursuing justice and rocking our middle income vote, then the board can vote them out, or the church can, right? It's a direct mirror of our socio-political, right? Why? Because our sociology will always, everything about our sociology will always mirror our socio-politics. So that's number one. Number two, America is utilitarian, right? Our dynamics are very transactional, right? And that is because we are a newer civilization. So what I mean by that is, you said something pretty interesting when you were talking about how the gym and the mall, right? See, people have no problem mixing and mingling around the gym and the mall because there is no personal cost. Right. I can go there, swipe my card, get what I need, and get out of there. And as long as it's transactional, people have no problem with that. The thing with the church is that the church is communal. It calls you to come and be in community with people. Right. And that's a harder ask. That's why naturally, right, that that dynamic and that diversity does not translate. But here's what's crazy. So the Bible is written in the context of a kingdom. There is a king who has sovereignty, and whatever he decrees goes, and he has just laws. And the kingdom is always a direct representation of the king. That's right. So America does not have that framework because we're a republic or a democracy, right? But I come from a colonial context from the British Empire where we were under a kingdom. So when I read the Bible, there is no discrepancy. I understand that when a sovereign says something, it becomes law and it becomes all these things, right? So the first mind shift for a lot of us has to come from going this right here. We have to transcend our socio-politics and start to look at this as a kingdom. So what does a kingdom say? A kingdom means our laws are literally the values of our king. So when we go into the Bible, Psalms 89 verse 14, right, it gives us a synopsis of what our king is all about. If he was running, this would be his 2 campaign strategies. It says righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Your throne stands on these 2 irrefutable and immutable promises, righteousness and justice. So that means as long as we're in right standing with him, then the other thing is justice. So that's why I say this, and it's very unpopular, but it resonates with a lot of pastors. We are not called to the racial conversation specifically. We're called to justice because as kingdom people, that is what our king is about. So if you come and sit down with me and you want to process your racial experience, I'm not interested until you start saying this injustice was perpetrated on me because of this racial experience. Then I have skin in the game. Black, white, Asian, it doesn't matter. As a kingdom person, I am called to justice. And that's why the church has a voice and has a say in this specific conversation, because the Black lives that are being taken unjustly.
Right.
It's not right. It's the injustice that has us rising up. And so to the American church, what I would say to the white church is, let's transcend the race, because race divides, right? Ours was not, if it was a democracy, then we could vote and say, you know what, let's all come together and vote on the things that we will care about. But because it's a kingdom under a sovereign king, it means then our laws and our priorities are then aligned around the things that our king cares about.
That's good.
And our king is a king of justice. Therefore, the justice conversation isn't just relevant, but it is a mandate for every church and every single person who says that Jesus, who professes the lordship of Jesus in their lives.
Come on, man. I wanted to give you a few amens right there. The passion was just oozing out of you. What would you say then? Because, you know, when people talk about diversity, they talk about revelations, and every tongue and tribe will one day stand before the throne room of God. In Galatians, where it says there's no longer Jew, Gentile, slave, free, male, female. What would you speak to those who would say, man, we also serve a king that is about diversity, who's about inclusivity?
Come on. I think first of all, man, the church becomes the perfect context from that, because we come from a triune God, a God who always existed in unity, right? And then he makes us in his image according to his likeness, right? Which means as the effect, everything about what we do has to mirror the cause. That's the beginning. We also get a glimpse into the end. And in the end, it means I still have this accent. I still have my skin, right? There are redeemed aspects of my ethnicity, which then make it into heaven. So what is this? If you read that scripture specifically, Revelation 7 verse 9, it talks about all those from every tribe and tongue and accent and ethnicity and all these things. But all those things are united by 2 things. Number 1, they're all dressed in white. And number 2, they're washed by the blood of the Lamb. And those things, right, the uniform and the blood are things that are available for us today. It's not just somewhere in the future we finally get access to the blood and the white robes, which is righteous and everything. No, it's the exact same thing. When we come here today, right now, I have the mandate to essentially reach out to my neighbor, right? Clothed in righteousness, which means my motives are pure in the righteousness, and right, covered by the blood of the Lamb, and begin to say to people, no, we are one now, right? Because under that umbrella of the uniform, the white uniform that unites us, and the blood that makes us one, then we can begin to enjoy redeemed aspects of our culture today. I can sit down with an Indian person and enjoy chicken tikka masala, because that is a redeemed aspect of what that looks like, right? But culturally, this is like, let me give you an example. I love how you brought up the parable of the good Samaritan. You know that culturally that was a racial conversation, but also culturally there are no villains in that story, right? The priest passes aside because for him to engage with that Samaritan would have been a violation of God's law in Numbers 19, or is it 13? But which states that priests cannot touch dead things, right? So it would have been irresponsible for him, because then he has to go through a 7-day purification period where even on the 3rd day he goes and sprinkles like hyssop and water and everything. Imagine the water stains, how mad his wife would have been. Have you been messing around with dead people again?
Right.
So he was morally, or rather he was theologically, let me put it that way, and socially and politically obligated to stay away from dead people. Well, the second was a Levite, right? Levites were the interns. Levites were gifted to the priest. Levites could not operate, right, socially and historically outside the premise,
right,
of what they were called to. So the Levite could not have done anything other than what he saw the the priest doing. That's why when Jesus is telling this story, there is no outrage about what about the good priest or what about the bad priest. No, they existed within the parameters of their social order. They had systemic excuses for not engaging, which I believe is what Jesus is also turning on its head and saying, what do you do when you have a cultural and social excuse to not engage in the social justice conversation?
That's good.
But the thing about the Samaritan is he was not encumbered by those social chains, let me put it that way. And what he does is, which I believe is a lesson for everybody, he engages, and this is where people miss it, at personal cost and for long-term commitment.
Right.
Says whatever, here's my money, and whatever you spend, I will repay. So he literally writes a blank check, carte blanche, on his privilege and says, whatever it costs, I will take care of it.
Come on.
And then he says, for however long, if that guy's recovery took 2 years, it means he would pay personally, he would leverage his personal estate, right, for the duration of that.
Come on.
So I feel like when we jump into the story, just to kind of tie what I was saying up, is that for white America, for kingdom people, for justice people, the call is threefold, right? At personal cost and for the long haul, and in spite of systemic structures.
That's good.
That give you like a carte blanche or a free, like, you know what I'm saying, or immunity from that. So
I love that. I love that analogy too, because the reality is our world can and does make it hard to engage in fighting the fight for justice.
Exactly.
And you mentioned it earlier, but whether it's redlining, and man, I live so far away from where injustice happens, whether it's countries away. I don't have, X amount of resources. I don't have the relationships. I'm a part of a church that only focuses on this. There are so many excuses that we can come up with that keep us from getting uncomfortable and finding a way to meet the needs of people all over our world and worlds that aren't too far away from us. And so the way the story is framed, he wanted to justify his actions.
Exactly.
And
who is my neighbor, right?
And a lot of times we use questions to justify our actions.
That's right.
And so I love what you said. It's like, man, we got to be willing to make a long-term commitment. We got to be willing to use whatever we have to make a difference in the lives of others.
Precisely. Yeah.
I think about, you mentioned too earlier about Sundays being one of the most segregated days of the week.
Yeah.
And I think Sundays is the purest picture of people living out of their preferences.
Oh, that's good. Come on.
Because a lot of times we don't necessarily work where we prefer. We don't necessarily go to the gym we prefer. We go to the one that's closest to our house.
Yeah.
We don't shop necessarily where we prefer, but we go to church where we prefer.
That's right.
And with people we prefer and where we feel most welcome. And so as a result, we end up doing a lot of life with people who are like us.
Yeah.
And never experiencing the beauty of engaging a context that, whether it's culturally, racially, generationally diverse.
And it's so funny that you say that, because so two things. Number one, even just on that, people always talk about the Acts church, right? The Acts 2 church. It's like everybody having everything in common. It's almost like we will idolize that church.
Yeah.
Oblivious of the fact that that was the most diverse expression of church. No, not then. Back then, it was a primarily Jewish church.
Yeah.
If you had brought a Gentile to that, it's game over.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So
yes.
even the church model that we hold up, it wasn't even until like Antioch and everything that the church started, right? Yeah. But back then, the racial conversation was between Jew and Gentile. And the Acts 2 church was the most segregated church that we have in the Bible.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? And so a lot of of our church ecology still mirrors that thing, because church is the people that I'm in community with.
Right.
So our calling then is to, instead of going back to idolize the Acts 2 church, to reach into the Revelation 7 church.
That's good.
And bring those aspects and begin to craft a counter narrative, right? Model of a church now where the representation doesn't look like where we come from, which was 2.0, but it looks like the glorified expression of where we are going.
Come on, man.
And so
I like that.
Come on.
Well, I love that, because everyone talks about the Acts 2 church.
Exactly.
And it's chapters later, God calls Peter to the Gentiles.
Yes.
And then what does Peter do? He goes back because he's like, man, I'm more comfortable over here.
Yep.
And then Paul and the apostles have to call him out.
Come on.
Say, no, we're called to people groups that weren't originally in God's family. But I love what you said, man. Let's start at Revelation.
Yes.
And let's work our way backwards. And Acts was the beginning, but it wasn't the end.
Exactly. And that's why I believe we get the redemptive blueprint for where we are going. Because our as visionaries, and you know this as kingdom people, is so God's dynamic with people has always been to give them the blueprint. Right. And then commission them to build based off of the blueprint. It's how the tabernacle was built. It's how, when you read the Pentateuch, it's a lot of plans and blueprints, right? I believe that's the same reason that we're given the book of Revelation, not to confuse us, not so that the left behind guys can make a ton of money writing scary books. No, it's so that we can look and say, Father, what does the end look like? And then from that end, begin to reverse engineer a present whose trajectory is consistent with where we are going. That's why I believe we're given the book of Revelation. And racially, that's why I believe we should look and say, if God is calling you to start a church, then go, no, it's not Acts 2 church. No, this is Revelation 7 church. Then begin to build systems and strategies around how can I make sure that on any given Sunday, when you walk into Omaha United with Bishop Josh Dotzler, it's like every worship song, you see people from every tribe and tongue, which transcends the sociology and the injustice. I even believe when you look at redlining and everything, when you look at it from a broader and spiritual scale, I feel like that was the enemy's plan, because he knew that after a while, then the church's liturgy will mirror the sociology around them. So if we can keep white people living together, then we can have a myopic church which doesn't tap into the Revelation 7 blessing. Bro, can you imagine you go to a church and it starts with some good old gospel music, and somewhere in the middle we have some mariachi worship, and towards the end we have some Indian worship and everything. That is heaven on earth, and we have the blueprints to create what that looks like. Build a diverse leadership team. Build a church according to the Revelation blueprint, and let's see what God does with it. I would go to that church.
I'll sign me up, man. I'll be a part of that church. So I love what you're saying about Acts 2, and even as you're talking, I'm thinking about what you said earlier about our political and socioeconomics, and how, let's be honest, it was a pastor and a mega church that made Acts 2 popular.
Ooh,
because why is Acts 2 more popular than some of the other versions of the church in Scripture?
That's right.
And it was because there was success stories.
Yeah.
And we elevated those portions of scripture
Boom.
and
That's right.
elevated them probably beyond God's
Yeah.
blueprint
Yeah.
based in the context of the entire scripture and the entire
Come
New
on.
Testament.
Come on.
And so I think
that is so true. No, sir, I got excited. I didn't mean to cut you.
Oh, go ahead.
You were finishing your thought. I also believe too, man, I want to get your thoughts on this. It's something that I fundamentally believe, right? The Bible says you have put eternity in the hearts of men, right? And so as humans, right, made in the image of an eternal God, there's an aspect of us that always desires oneness and kingdom.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of social movements, right, will always, that's why socialism, right, and communism are so appealing to the masses. It's like, wait, having everything in common and everything together. So there's a part in us that still, right, is just drawn to people living together and having everything in common.
Right.
So I think when people read this Bible and then look inside and feel like a longing and there's a connection and they're going, no, that is that.
Right.
Right. And we forget the fact that the elevated version of that is in Revelation,
right,
where we're all living together and we're praising the Lamb. And
right.
John 17, the call is to oneness. May they be one as we are one. And oneness and unity are different, right? Unity means we have different things. We're doing the same thing, or we're doing different things in the same direction. Right. Oneness means we are like one, literally, like your wife and you. You know what I'm saying? And so it's interesting, man. It's very interesting.
It's good.
Yeah.
Well, I know with World Vision, with what you guys are doing, you're helping get people on the same page to become one, to think with similar kingdom mindsets.
Come on.
For individuals who are listening, we're gonna kind of bring this in because we could keep talking forever.
Oh my gosh.
I'm loving this conversation.
Yeah.
But for individuals listening, again, our passion is to see people wherever they are use their influence to impact their world. And so you've got individuals who are listening, whether they're at school, whether they're at their job, in their community.
Yeah.
How do they live out our kingdom mandate to seek justice right where they are?
Come on.
And then on the other side, you've got pastors, leaders, business leaders. Man, how do they pursue their kingdom mandate to seek justice?
Man, I think that that's a great question. Thank you for throwing it to me, Josh. I think the strategy is very clear, right, across Scripture. I think the implementations of that strategy is what would differ, and so I'll jump into that. But let's start with the core strategy. It's the table, right? Before Jesus was betrayed, it was at the table that he had the conversations, right? Psalms 23, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, right? The church began at a table. You see what I'm talking about? They were all together in a room and they went about breaking bread and all these things. And it ends, where does it end? At a table, the marriage feast of the Lamb, right? And so our strategy is tables. I say this to some of my friends and I say, listen, the indictment with all the riots and everything, what people are saying is that they feel unheard. And the reason people feel unheard is that we, the kingdom neighbors, have not invited them to our tables.
Right.
Right. And what that does is, Josh, I don't think you'd be quick to burn down my house if you sat at my table. Right. And I don't think you'd even feel like you have to go and engage in destructive protest, because protesting is supposedly the language of the unheard, if I've invited you over to my table to have specific conversations. So the strategy is the table. Individuals, what do I mean? Right? Reach out with a trembling voice and a trembling hands, reach out to someone who does not look like you and invite them to your table. Cook them your food, and if they like it, they like it. If they don't, they can bring their own hot sauce, whatever it is. But in that table, in conversation, right, then you will notice that we will become closer. And in that place of communion, which is what the Lord's Supper is essentially, it was like, you will begin to see that prejudices and everything begin to just drop off. And I'm telling you, I'm not so quick to be racist or to have racial tendencies if I know the very least is, I don't know about all Black people, but I know that Josh is like this.
Right.
I know that Reward is like this. And that is the beginning of uprooting racism from its systemic roots.
Yep.
And what does it look like for pastors and everything? Facilitate tables and spaces for your people to find this.
That's good.
If you're a predominantly white church, you and a Black pastor come into a room, start having the conversation, have them preach at your church, you preach at their church, and begin to expose your congregation to what it looks like when two high capacity leaders process not even the racial conversation, but friendship at the same table. Yeah. I did this thing called Spaces, and that I used that same strategy, and the hashtag was the table was set. What I do is I took two high capacity like megachurch context pastors, and I brought them together and I said, let's have a conversation. And so what happened is naturally they brought their people, right? One was predominantly white, one was predominantly Black. And so they brought their people, right? Completely separate worlds, and you can tell. And it was funny because, so then we started asking each other hard questions. And I said, this is a space for you to ask stupid questions. If you've ever wanted to ask a white person a stupid question, this is the place. So they started asking questions. And when the white pastor would ask a question, everybody, their white congregation would be like, yeah, I don't get that. Why would people riot? And then the Black pastor would give a wisdom-filled answer. And then all the white people would be like, oh, I never thought of it that way. And all the Black people would be like, duh. And then what began to happen is in the comments, you begin to see, and you can go back and read and watch and read the comments. You begin to see like all this congruence. And towards the end of the conversation, bro, it was incredible because people were like, hey, any of you guys from this particular church, if you're ever in Dallas, or if you're in Carolina, if you're ever in Baltimore, you have a home here, please come, we'll show you all these things. Wow. And literally by watching their leaders sit at a table and have a conversation for about an hour and a half, you merged two worlds and every hidden bias and ignorance was thrown off. So pastors, create spaces and tables for your people in your congregation to process, model what diversity looks like, because that's what shepherds do. They model and sheep follow. And as individuals, as the sheep, begin to reach across cultural and racial lines and begin to tap into the redemptive aspects of other people's cultures. Start with food. That's a huge thing. That is huge. Start with food, cuisine, and everything else from there will happen, because fellowship is the strategy for racial unification.
You tap into that food, you tap into the heart and soul of that person. Take down a intricate and intimate line of communication.
Yo, I'm telling you, man. I don't care. My challenge to people, and you know this is true, Josh, I cannot be racist if I go and eat Iranian food and it rocks my world.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? If I know a good Iranian dish and a good Iranian person, forget it. That's the beginning. That is, the walls are coming down. So
I mean, the relationships are a game changer.
That's right.
And it's hard to hate on somebody when you know them, when you understand their culture, context. Easy to hate and throw shade from a distance.
And you know what the funny thing is? The one more thing I'll say about spaces, it was crazy how God would perfectly match the pastors. Like, I think the most recent one that I did, it's like the pastors kind of come in, and then I have them introduce their families because there's a family conversation in their church. And so all of a sudden this pastor was talking about how he met his wife, and the white pastor was like, oh my gosh, that's when I met my wife too. And then they're like, and this is my birthday. They're like, oh my gosh, we have the same birthday. So that very thing was so powerful, because it's like, are we more similar? Right. Kind of like that. If you watch Step Brothers, did we just become best friends?
Yes.
Yeah, it's one of those.
Come on, man. Well, hey, where can people find those conversations? Where can they follow you, get more information?
Thank you, brother. They can just follow me on social media. It's at Reward, REWRD, Sibanda, SIBANDA. So everything that I'm kind of doing and everything I post, and I've archived this stuff on there. Or if you follow Blackbyrd, B with a Y, Blackbyrd TV, at Blackbyrd TV, or Blackbyrd.tv is the website. I've also curated everything on there. But usually from social media, Instagram and Facebook, if you look up Reward Sibanda, you can always get a sense of what I'm doing because that is our primary platform. And then we transcribe stuff to YouTube and everything. But yeah, come on, let's have the conversation.
Come on, man. Well, hey, bro, I appreciate you taking time to have this conversation today. And I'm excited for people who are going to listen. We'll share all your information so people can check you out, find you. I know you're going to have more stuff coming out. I know there's books in the future. I'm sure other resources. I mean, he flies around the world to speak at churches. And so you're a local pastor and you're looking for somebody to communicate and share the heart that you've heard today. Make sure, reach out to my friend, my brother Reward. And again, man, just thanks for being a part. Love how God is using you, not just at World Vision, but in our country, around the world. I'm excited to get on one of these trips with you one of these days too, man.
Bro, we're going to the field.
Come on.
Before, man, I even jump up, I just wanted to honor you, man. Just your legacy of serving him and his has been apparent from day one. The work that you're doing in Omaha, right, in inner city, in the hardest context and everything. Dude, God sees that labor of love. And my prayer is that he would bring the right people to partner with you, man, and just going after his purposes for your city and for your generation. Your heart, even in the racial conversation, you are someone who deeply inspires me. I watch you closely, and I know God's hand is over you and your ministry, bro. And this platform is going to explode because this is a prime example of what a kingdom table looks like. So thank you for not leaning into the excuses. Thank you for not hiding behind any privilege the Lord may have accorded you. But thank you for being in the margins outside of the camp where our Father is and doing what you're called and born to do. I honor you, dude. Love you, man. And I am a huge fan.
Come on, man.
Your platform.
That means a ton. I appreciate you sharing that and saying that. And I'm excited for the more that God's going to do and spending time together. So thank you. Hey, thanks for listening to our conversation today. I know it was a good one. I'm excited for you to listen to it. And, you know, we say it all the time. You don't have to lead and do everything, but God has called you to do something.
Come on.
Find out where he's giving you influence. Use that influence to impact the world around you.